Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the mornings. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Tuesday, Election Day, everybody. Election Day, November 4th, 2025. Time for another show, but not for Dick Cheney. What can I tell you? He did not live to see the outcome of this election. I don't know if it was something he was thinking about holding on for, but it doesn't appear to matter. And the angel of death apologized to him, which is amazing. But there you have it. Yes, he did live to see his handiwork in the government used to further destroy the America's democracy, its reputation abroad, its reputation at home, and even his own daughter. But what can you do? We don't get everything. All right, so there you go. There's lots of others making comments about the news of his death. I don't know. I guess I thought a while ago I would be more excited about this, but since then he's been so wholly surpassed by worse presidents and vice presidents that I don't know. I can't get that excited anymore. And there was, I guess, what would pass for a redemption arc for any other character in the last couple of years, I suppose, but I don't know that it's going to credit him a great deal. At any rate, lots of obituaries were already in the can, so lots of people have. And by the way, anything you write about Dick Cheney, that's where it belongs. Just throw it straight in down the can and flush twice. But lots of people had already written their obituaries, and I think a lot of them were written back when people felt a little more strongly, or maybe with a little more venom, the way they did about Dick Cheney. And so it might be interesting to review a couple of those. I don't know what to tell you. Like I said, there's no more room for any more jokes. You're welcome to make them. I don't feel like I was going to put any energy into it today on that front. We'll save our energy for elsewhere. There's a lot going on, as you know. Tuesday's it's a long show. Greg's not here. He's out again monitoring the outcome of today's elections, which are designed exclusively, by the way, and we thank the founders of the United States of America for doing this, exclusively for producing content for Wednesday Kagro in the morning shows. So the whole country on the edge of their seat watching these elections. It's very interesting trying to make a national trend out of all of these things. But, there's certainly something to be gleaned from it. And if Democrats sweep the races across the board, it'll mean something. Of course, if they lose the attorney general race in Virginia, it will be interpreted to mean the exact opposite, despite having won every other race. So get out there and vote. If you are in Virginia and you haven't voted, hurry up. They only give you till 7 p.m. and we're off of daylight savings time, so it'll sneak up on you. Make sure you do it early and do it right, for God's sake. Please don't get it wrong this time. All right. So let's see. There are a few other things that I wanted to get to today, but I guess top of the news would have to be the Cheney news. That's what everybody's talking about. And of course, as I said, there are a lot of good offerings out there in terms of recapping the life that was, if you want to call that Dick Cheney. I guess I've got two on hand, but I think all the evidence weighs in favor of starting with Empty Wheel on that one, who doubtless, I don't know whether she'll be exploring whether or not Dick Cheney is in that great fifth branch in the sky or beneath the earth, depending on where you think it might be located, or whether he's just done with government. I mean, he's ruined it, of course, going forward. And I think I've seen a couple of people being very reflective about that. And that's really where the story lies, I think, is that Dick Cheney, one of the most enthusiastic, we've got,
enthusiasm.
Yeah, that's the one. We got a sound effect for that. But one of the most enthusiastic boosters of the unitary executive theory, which has come back to bite not only him, but all the rest of us. Expansive use of executive power, just straight up propaganda and lying when necessary to get your way. And lo and behold, it's come back to haunt us, the same and worse. Yeah, more or less as predicted, but straight to Barack Obama's face in May of 2009. Was point blank, look, if we don't do something about these guys having gone so far past America's democratic norms, you're just going to get the same and worse from the very next Republican president. We didn't know who it was going to be, but, well, we did. Anyway, like I said, we'll go to the more organized thoughts to begin with and see what it causes to fall out of our brain along the way. Dick Cheney, gone but not forgotten, is the piece Empty Wheel is running with today. I had been wondering if Dick Cheney were unwell given Liz Cheney's silence. He died yesterday. Oh, there's not much to this, but there's a lot of links. Amid the chaos of the Trump administration implementing all of Cheney's dreams of unitary executive on Chicago's residents and Latin American fishermen, his death didn't even make it above the fold of the New York Times. Is that right? This blog has probably written 500 stories on Dick Cheney about torture, illegal surveillance, about drone strikes, about outing Valerie Plame, but the most recent are telling for his legacy. We have the linked stories entitled Tulsi Gabbard's NIE Lies Make Dick Cheney Look Honest by Comparison. That's a good way to go, looking honest. Well, by comparison. John Hughes' Old Trash and the South Shore Apartment Invasion. That's another recent entry here. Dick Cheney's Apprentice Strikes. That being on John Bolton's refusal to testify in impeachment. And child rapist George Nader introduced Dick Cheney and Ahmad Chalabi. There's an old hit for you. We never did recover, as she says, from the things Dick Cheney did to the United States. That's true. And now the precedents he established have empowered a madman. Well, that's short and sweet, and certainly true. The last sentence does the whole thing for you, really. In case you're wondering, I know people think or ponder from time to time, I wonder how long it'll take us to recover from the Trump era. Well, we never recovered from the Cheney era, and it gave birth to much worse, the Trump era, and I know, that's a little bit depressing. So, but, you can feel down and pouty. There's a famous person is dead. No one will question you. All right. We'll see also where everybody, I think, is waiting. Maybe, I don't know. When I woke up, anyway, 10 hours ago, with bated breath to see, oh, God, how is the president, quote unquote, the president of the United States going to react to an important personage dying like this, given how rotten he's been at being, comforter in chief or whatever. I don't need any comforting over this, but, there's a certain decorum to handling these deaths, and Trump really basically refuses to participate in that game, which is, I guess you could consider refreshing, except for the fact that, I wish he'd shut up, or maybe it was him that died. But, whatever. If wishes were... All right, well, anyway. Moving on. There is a longer recounting of just how terrible Dick Cheney was, offered up by the Lawyers, Guns, and Money blog. Let me open that one up because I took a quick look at that one and said, all right, well, somebody else is going to have to organize thoughts on Dick Cheney. And I'm sure that there'll be more forthcoming from Marcy, but as she said, she's probably just a little burnt out on the Dick Cheney coverage and I'm just glad I don't have to cover him having died in office and do 1,000 words on it. But whatever. Here's Cheney. That's all it is. The title of the piece at Lawyers, Guns, and Money. Cheney by Eric Loomis. And here's what we got. Dick Cheney, one of America's worst war criminals, is dead. It's like, feels like, it's the Harry Potter line in mind. Harry Potter is dead. Yeah, that's the way it sort of feels for me. Oh, by the way, before I even go any further, I think I did see, I got to find it in Blue Sky here, but I saw Spencer Ackerman mentioning a sad fact of the media landscape these days, I guess I would say. Let's see if I can find was Spencer Ackerman, wasn't it? Saying, here we are. No one commissioned a Cheney obit from me, believe it or not, except a friend who subsequently left his outlet. So, I mean, he did have a obit, advanced obit in the can and was ready to run it in whatever outlet his friend used to work at, but he's gone now. And he's just putting out the feeler. So I'll do this. I'll help him amplify his message. If you're an editor and you pay more than $1.50 a word, reach out. And if you hate your outlet, be prepared to pay more. Okay. If my terms are not acceptable, my book works as a Cheney obituary. His book being linked here, Reign of Terror, How the 9/11 Era Destabilized America and Produced Trump. I think that would be a pretty good and fitting obit for today. But if you're a publisher or an editor, I highly recommend it. Reach out to Spencer Ackerman. He's, of course, attackerman.bluesky.social these days. And it would be a shame for his probably pre-written work on Cheney's passing to go unused. So if you find yourselves without something at the ready or interested in something for a Sunday, let's say, you might give him a call. All right. So back to what Eric Loomis had to say on the subject. Dick Cheney, one of America's worst war criminals, is dead. Born in 1941 in Lincoln, Nebraska, which amazingly makes University of Nebraska football only the second most grotesque American cultural phenomenon out of that city. You can see where we're going. Dick Cheney's family moved to Wyoming when he was a child, if such a figure ever had the innocence of youth. He went to Yale and flunked out. So chin up for those of you who are contemplating the same fate. Making George W. Bush the most successful Yalee in the upper heights of his administration before graduating eventually from the University of Wyoming. For a man who would show tremendous joy at killing brown people around the world from an office in D.C., Dick Cheney cowered away from doing so personally. Of course, he applied and received a mere 5 deferments so he could avoid fighting in the Vietnam War. In 1989, a Washington Post reporter asked him about this, and he replied, "I had other priorities in the 60s than military service." So did a whole lot of other people in the 2000s, and the 1960s for that matter. But of course, that never stopped Cheney from dooming them to fight. Cheney's political career began in 1969, when he became a staffer for Representative William Steiger from Wisconsin, a man far greater than his more famous acolyte. He then joined the staff of a rising Republican named Donald Rumsfeld. Ever heard of that guy? He rode the Republican Lightning along with Uncle Don, holding a variety of positions in the Nixon and Ford administrations, including White House staff assistant in 1971, assistant director to the Cost of Living Council from 1971 to 1973, and deputy assistant to the president from 1974 to 1975. When Gerald Ford named Rumsfeld Secretary of Defense, Cheney was called on to replace Rummy as chief of staff. While working for Ford, Cheney decided that the best way his boss could fend off Reagan was to declare war on unions. He convinced Ford to break promises to labor, vetoing legislation to liberalize picketing around construction sites, so outraging Secretary of Labor John Dunlop that the latter resigned in protest. This was a time when the Church Committee was investigating the executive branch abuses of the Nixon administration, and Cheney's reaction to this was outrage, as he already believed in the imperial presidency, an idea that the Trump administration is running with as part of its fascist play. And yes, sure, Cheney hates Trump and has actively opposed him in the Republican Party, but do not let that distract you from the rest of Cheney's evil life. From that point forward, through his time in Congress and his role as vice president, Cheney consistently argued that Congress should cede power to the presidency, especially on the issue of national security. This has caused tremendous damage to the nation and contributed significantly to the deaths of millions of people. And I don't know if he's going to use the term at any point here, but I think I want to intervene and just interject into the middle of this that Cheney, one of the mechanisms by which he advocated for for Congress to cede powers to the executive and for the unitary executive to take on that much more power, was his, I think, stated goal. Anyway, what the goal that was attributed to him, relitigating Watergate. This was a guy who thought the Watergate investigation was a big mistake, its conclusions were erroneous, and that essentially ascribing to the or subscribing to the Nixon doctrine, if the president does it, that means it's not illegal, and seeking to curtail all of the legacy, really across the board, all of the legacy of Watergate, from campaign finance reform to war powers to domestic espionage and surveillance. All the constraints placed on the presidency post-Watergate, he wanted undone, and successfully undid many, if not all of them. And that was the through line there, not only for his own life, but up to the Trump presidency and why he's so responsible for it. So anyway, I wanted to get that phrase out there, the relitigating Watergate, because he's not the only one on that one, but that's a common thread for a lot of Republicans over the past 20 to 30 years. So, and stretching further back, but I mean, the past 20 or 30 years, they've continued that project. It made more sense. Relitigating Watergate made more sense in the raw aftermath of Watergate. But they were still doing it 30 years past Watergate, and sure that they were right. Anyway, so we left off where? Here, and then should continue. Cheney, right. Don't let the fact that he hates Trump now distract you from the evil of the rest of Cheney's life. And then, yes, there was the unitary executive, and this has caused tremendous damage to the nation and contributed significantly to the deaths of millions of people. Cheney then went on to Congress, being elected to the House from Wyoming in 1978. He served 5 terms, leaving office in 1989. He was as horrible as you would expect. He voted against creating the Department of Education. He hated the idea of a holiday to honor Martin Luther King. He voted to defund Head Start. Of course, all of this is just made him a rising star in a party increasingly committed to extremism. He was elected to be chairman of the House Republican Conference in 1987, and then House Minority Whip in 1988. Cheney also supported apartheid, calling the African National Congress a terrorist organization. In 1986, Cheney voted against a congressional resolution calling for the freeing of Nelson Mandela. Of course, he had support in that position from Ronald Reagan, but with the Republican Party significantly less racist in the 1980s than it is today, the veto was overridden. No thanks to Cheney. In 2000, he defended this position, saying, "I don't have any problems at all with the vote I cast 20 years ago." He actually justified his opposition to South African sanctions by saying that sanctions don't work, a policy he would remain remarkably inconsistent about through his long putrescent career. Cheney came to national prominence as Secretary of Defense under George H.W. Bush, elected to the office by a 92-0 vote after the Senate rejected John Tower, a move that probably turned out unfortunate in the end. Cheney was the top officer overseeing the invasion of Panama, the last old-school U.S. invasion of Latin America to get rid of a troublesome leader. He, of course, held the job during the Gulf War. Bush awarded him the Presidential Medal of Freedom in 1991, but in truth, he was not terrible at this job, reducing the size of the military budget as the Cold War finally ran down. In particular, he resisted congressional pressure to buy weapons systems that just so happened to benefit particular congressional districts. He also strongly supported NATO, a position that today is not a given by a new generation of Republicans. After leaving government, Cheney got butt naked in bed with his defense industry friends. I think that's just metaphorical, but hey, I don't know. He earned a mere $44 million during his time at Halliburton. He became CEO of the company in 1995 after hanging out on a fishing trip with Halliburton executives in Canada. I got to start doing that. Not every recreational trip with Cheney would go so well for his friends. If someone so reptilian can be said to have had friends instead of sycophants, they loved him because he, a few extraneous typos in here. They loved him because he had close relationships with such benign regimes as the Saudi monarchy that he could use to vastly expand their business opportunities. While heading Halliburton, Cheney figured out ways that the company could avoid the U.S. sanctions against Iraq. Oh, and also Libya and Iran, by using subsidiaries that also allowed the company to avoid paying taxes. In 2000, George W. Bush, the dimmest bulb in the room, asked Dick Cheney to head his vice presidential selection team. Who better to represent the administration of a wannabe Texan than the CEO of Halliburton? Cheney only had one logical name for the job: himself. He really had to sacrifice, too. Since he could not technically be a CEO and VP, what innocent times those were, Halliburton sent him off with a mere $20 million severance package. He also sold his Dallas home and moved back to Wyoming so he wouldn't be from the same state as W, and therefore be constitutionally eligible to the job. When the Supreme Court and Ralph Nader gave the election to Bush, Cheney recommended only the best people to the cabinet. He got good friend Don Rumsfeld returned to defense. He did lose out on his hope to have Paul Wolfowitz placed at the head of the CIA. That would have gone well. But Wolfie was instead handed over to Rumsfeld, and the three of them would plan ways to get rid of Saddam Hussein. Then 9/11 happened. Mr. Imperial Presidency was ready for action. Cheney knew before the Iraq War began that Saddam Hussein likely did not have weapons of mass destruction. As early as September 21st, 2001, Bush received CIA briefings arguing that there was no connection between Iraq and the attacks. Do you think that mattered? Ha ha ha. It actually says that. Those reports continued. And yet Cheney lied consistently over and over again, making the case that Saddam Hussein was the greatest threat to the United States. He repeatedly went on national television to say that Saddam was a great danger to Americans. On March 16, 2003, he stated, "We believe he has, in fact, reconstituted nuclear weapons." When we did not find any reconstituted nuclear weapons or anything else that was a threat to the United States, Cheney doubled down, saying that those who opposed the Great War for Iraqi freedom to sell oil to the United States were pushing cynical and pernicious falsehoods. As typical for a 21st century Republican, for Cheney, this was all about projection. When confronted by a reporter that the majority of Americans opposed the war, his response was a dismissive, "So?" And, of course, Cheney was instrumental in creating the torture regime that completely dismissed all shreds of humanity the U.S. could ever claim during those 8 years, engaging in completely ineffective interrogation regime that was more concerned with sadistically punishing supposed enemies of the nation rather than finding out information. Cheney was responsible for devising the NSA program to monitor the emails and phone calls of American citizens suspected of terrorist activities or sympathies without a warrant. It was his behind-the-scenes maneuvering immediately after 9/11 that set up the indefinite detentions, as he had his lawyer write up a document in secret that Bush signed without even informing Colin Powell or Condoleezza Rice that it existed. Cheney's close relationship with Iraqi dissident Ahmed Chalabi worked out great for both Iraq and the United States. Chalabi had a great scam going on, telling Dick Cheney and his friends the lies they wanted to hear about Saddam Hussein. Sure, it all fell apart when the U.S. invaded Iraq. Nothing Chalabi said was true, and no one in Iraq had any interest in hearing anything Chalabi had to say. I'm going to change pronunciations on him there. I think it's got to be closer to Chalabi, not but Chalabi than Chalabi, but maybe Chalabi would be a better approximation. But anyway, hey, he strung Cheney along for a long time, and Cheney wanted to be hooked. Even after the New York Times reported that Chalabi was giving U.S. secrets to Iranian President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, Cheney still wanted him placed at the head of the Iraqi government. As late as November of 2005, long after Chalabi had been completely discredited, Cheney was inviting him to the White House. Cheney received a little bit of credit from liberals for supporting at least the broad idea of gay marriage, but this is not earned. It is typical Republican. I oppose everything that would bring greater equality unless it personally affects me because his daughter is a lesbian. This is the Cheney version of Bob Dole's passion for the American Disabilities Act because of his World War II wounds, while opposing anything else to make people's lives better that don't personally affect him. Cheney typically engaged in all sorts of sketchy behavior while vice president, while seeking to cover it all up under his imperial presidency ideas. Working with his Enron buddies to craft energy policies backfired when Enron went under. But Cheney refused to provide the National Archives all sorts of documentation and used arguments about executive privilege to deny congressional requests for information. And, of course, it was his office that exposed Valerie Plame as a CIA agent. He did all he could to undermine environmental standards, promote dirty energy, and sought to force the CDC to delete information from a report about the effects of climate change upon health. Also, going hunting with Cheney was a bad idea, but remember, if the VP shoots you in the face, you apologize to the VP. That's the way the imperial presidency works. Cheney barely lived for years. That's an interesting way of putting it. He had a heart transplant, but was utterly indifferent to the story of individuals, or the individual who died to give him that heart. This is hardly atypical of a man who condemned thousands of American soldiers and hundreds of thousands of Iraqis to death, who played a critical role in creating ISIS, and who was a cancer on the American body politic for decades. Now this leads us to the 2018 Adam McKay directed film about Cheney, Vice. It doesn't work that well as a film and is certainly less effective in style and substance than his previous, The Big Short. More, if you can believe it, after this. Hi everybody, it's me, David Waldman. Yes, the same guy who interrupts you all the time. Interrupting you one more time just to tell you again, another reminder that your contributions are what keep this show on the air, and patreon.com, patreon.com, is still among the easiest ways to make the sustaining subscription donations that keep us afloat. Are you ready for the pep talk about how our Patreon campaign is still going strong and growing? Well, too bad. Yeah, the plain fact is we actually are headed in the wrong direction, and whereas we once had about 175 monthly patrons, we're now actually down below 150. Time to recruit some more. Not exactly the kind of news I wanted to share, but there it is. For those of you in a position to support the show, patreon.com does make it easy to make those secure, recurring monthly contributions to do so. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. We've been through a lot together. The worst of the pandemic, we hope. The worst of the insurrection, we hope. So go ahead and treat yourself. You don't need an excuse. Give yourself the gift of a little something you enjoy in life. Support the show. And of course, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running on those options too. So thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We couldn't, or at least shouldn't, do it without you. Hope you'll be on board soon too. Thanks for all your support. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. There was just a little bit left to what Eric Loomis had to say, probably some time ago, about Dick Cheney, and we'll see if we can't get through it. Correcting the mistake of not having gone to the lozenges earlier in the show, but where we left off was this interesting tangent. It says this now leads us to the 2018 Adam McKay directed film about Cheney, Vice. It doesn't work that well as a film. I don't believe I've seen it, I don't think. And is certainly less effective in style and substance than his previous The Big Short. But the premise is great. The narrator is Jesse Plemons. And at the end of the film, we find out that he is the voice of the person who was killed and whose heart was transplanted into Cheney. And I mean, really, can you imagine? You want to be a good person and give over your bodily organs as transplants if you die and they're usable? You imagine all sorts of people your heart could go to. What you don't imagine is your sacrifice leading to more years of Dick Cheney. If you wanted to argue against organ transplants, and my organs, he says, are listed to be harvested if need be, I can't imagine a better argument to kill it than your heart is going to keep a human monster alive for another 15 years. Well, my goodness. Finally, Cheney's late life hatred of Trump does not make up for the rest of his life. That's fine. Good. You had some standard that couldn't be crossed. That is noted. It does not make up for Iraq or laying the groundwork for the imperial presidency that Trump drives his gold-plated tank down today. And maybe now that Cheney is dead, the Cheney Vice Presidential Library can finally open. Oh, okay. I don't know whether that's, there's a link here. I'm now curious it's a link to The Onion, ironically enough. So, but it's a 404 dead link. So, anyway, I don't know what that was supposed to be, but an interesting perspective and a useful compendium of some of the bigger problems that people are, I'm sure, wrestling with, alongside, I guess, the usual dictate, although we usually ignore it on the show, and probably you ignore it in your personal life too, the idea of, well, if you can't say anything nice, then don't say anything at all. Well, we'd, of course, have to be off the air entirely if that were the case. All right, so there are many other things happening, but yeah, Dick Cheney is still important part of the news. And I'm not even sure where I'm going to go next at this point, but there's a whole lot. And I think I want to note for the record that this is out because it grabbed my attention right away and reminded me of something we covered at some length way back. Maybe Craig Fastnacht remembers this one because he's been around and listening for this long. You may remember. I mentioned him yesterday that, and I got clarification email from him too, by the way, in case you were wondering by any chance. I don't really know why I think I went too far in depth in discussing it. I was just sort of fumbling around and actually looking for ways to spend more time on the fact that he's been such a long time loyal listener that I ended up kind of ruining, I think. And at any rate, by way of clarification, this was just a re-up, as it turns out. I would be thanking him for that as well. But I think he too, ran into, my credit card is expiring shortly, or I got a notice that it was, or I know that it is, and I just re-signed up. So it's the case, not only has he been listening for since the beginning, but been a supporter since the beginning as well, since I began asking for support anyway. You may recall that I did the show without bothering to ask for that kind of support for a very long time. And it took me I think it was 6-7 years of the show before this is the kind of person I am, I guess, before I felt comfortable even asking, well, maybe you actually like the show. If you've been listening for 5 years, maybe you want to help support the show. Anyway, thanks to Craig. Thanks for the clarification as well. But yeah, I bring this up only because it's probably been, how long has it been since I read this story on the air? And I've referenced it a couple of times since then. But anybody around who remembers our discussion of the Seattle Times series, this would be way back in in the heat of the gun fail days. The Seattle Times series, a 4-part series called Loaded with Lead, and it was essentially an investigation of a discussion of how indoor shooting ranges in particular are contaminated with lead particulate in the air, and people are, I guess, breathing in the lead contamination because you're just, there's a spray of lead dust that's ejected with the firing of every round, and of course the bullets themselves are lead, and they fragment and shatter as they hit the backstops. And anyway, the whole point is that the EPA will tell you that the place ought to be condemned, that it's far in excess of the safe levels of lead particulate in the air. But I don't know, ironically enough, strangely enough, believably enough, gun range owners, rather than mitigate that those lead levels and keep their customers safe, actually pled that there was some sort of Second Amendment problem with forcing them through the EPA or any other government agency to abate the lead contamination. Like, are you going to force me to spend money to clean up the lead contamination? I'm going to go under. And if I go under, then people can't come here and shoot their guns, and that's a Second Amendment violation. They can go elsewhere, but anyway, it was a very long series. I mean, it was 4 installments, but each one was a major piece. And by the way, one of them focused in particular on the fact that, all of our cops are trained this way, to shoot repeatedly all the time in indoor firing ranges, and how super dangerous it is to the police force to have them all risking lead poisoning. Although it explains a lot about sometimes cops and their behaviors when you think about the symptoms of acute lead poisoning. And now I'm reminded of that because there's a new, series of articles, and there's a new long article about a study on the subject in the New York Times, but from a slightly different angle. Although now that they bring it up, like, oh yeah, of course that would be a problem. Target shooting, they say, could be causing brain injuries, and that's not just people who miss and hit their fellow shooters in the brain either. We measured the danger. What's going on here? This a piece by Thomas Gibbons Neff, Dave Phillips, and Jeremy White, along with, they have some nice video here, so they're crediting a cinematographer as opposed to a photographer. We don't usually credit the photographers here, but I guess we'll call it out because it seems unusual, cinematographer. But anyway, basically pointing out that they put some instruments on people who were doing some indoor shooting and noticed, there are some major percussive effects from firing a gun and being so close to it. And no one has ever really measured the pressure waves on the head and on the chest and elsewhere. And a very good point. So basically it comes down to this, that an avid shooter, particularly indoor shooter, because of all the echoes, created by the surrounding walls, are subjecting themselves to percussive forces that are causing traumatic brain injury over time, and not that much time. It just occurred to me that this is on top of lead poisoning our police forces. We're also giving them concussive brain injury. Oh, and by the way, outfitting them head to toe in armor and telling them that they have immunity from prosecution, more or less, and that they hold the most dangerous job in the world, though they don't, and that, statistically anyway, and that filling the televisions with propaganda. It's, if you're ever sitting around wondering, why do we have cops that do things like, for instance, as the LA Dodgers win the World Series and people are out celebrating, immediately they're out in force and riot gear beating Los Angelinos on the street. Why? Why are they beating people on the street? Because they're cops and they have clubs and there are people on the street. So, it wasn't even a particularly raucous celebration going on. In fact, the video I saw was of people waiting in line on the sidewalk to get into a club to go in and celebrate. And speaking of clubs, the LAPD arrives on horseback in riot gear. The horses have riot gear, in fact. It's true. I'm not kidding. They do. And charging into the crowd with extra long clubs, like a cane that they might beat you with in Singapore, and charging in and just beating people who are waiting in line, like reading their phones, waiting to get into a club and celebrate the Dodgers win. Like, why are they doing this? And I can't tell you the real reason for it and what motivated them to respond this way, but I can tell you, traumatic brain injury plus lead poisoning could go a long way to explaining just generally why cops are the way they are, if they are any particular way. If you might find that they are out of step with what they ought to be doing, what it says on their cars, protecting and serving. All right. Well, that's something that we might get a chance to read. That might be a Friday kind of a thing. I just wanted to point out that it was out there. And I think maybe our time, though, in the long read category is better spent on a few other things. Like, for instance, there is another installment or another story excerpted from the Carol Leonig and Davis book here. Now I'm forgetting. Carol's first name I remember. Davis, offhand, no, but it'll be in the story. We'll get to it. Don't worry about it. But they have their forthcoming book, having a look inside the Justice Department. Injustice, How Politics and Fear Vanquished America's Justice Department. By the way, I guess that's set for publication today. So I suppose you could run out and get it. If you're an avid book reader, it would take me 100 years to get through just about anything at this point. So I'm grateful for the excerpts, except for the fact that, as with most such books, they reveal things that are horrific, and that I wish we knew better at the time. Not clear to me that the authors knew this information at a critical moment and withheld it from us, but that's the usual MO of book writers. Anyway, today's installment, or today's revelation, comes, we'll be reading it through MSNBC, where the headline reads as, quote, "If it was anybody else, we'd arrest him tomorrow." That's the quote. Justice Department aide said of Trump. A handful of documents found by the FBI at Mar-a-Lago were so sensitive. How sensitive were they? They were so sensitive that even a senior Justice Department official didn't have authorization to see them. That's not, I don't think, the biggest revelation of the story, but it is pretty interesting thinking about when, I'm sure listeners to the show have few illusions about how delicate those documents were. But of course, Trump and Trump fans, and to some extent, the supposedly neutral arbiters of our news media, et cetera, downplayed the sensitivity of the documents, the danger of having taken them out of the White House and stored them so insecurely and done God knows what else with them. All of that came through in more or less in real time. I mean, as the investigation was ongoing anyway. But just that one sort of gut punch of the thing. How sensitive were these things? Well, there were some nuclear secrets in it, but then there was also some stuff that wasn't so sensitive, or at least that's what Trump would have you believe. The FBI personnel sorting through what they found in the search had to do a physical U-turn. Okay, I have to get somebody else to look at this. I don't even have clearance to look at what's on this page. I have to document it as evidence. This is so sensitive that even I, the FBI agent up at the top of the chain of command, who's taking care of having searched the ex-president's house, I can't even look at this stuff. It's really rather remarkable. But since Carol Leonig and Aaron C. Davis have not only literally written the book on it, but also organized their thoughts on it, let's turn to what they have excerpted here for MSNBC. It is their work about their own work, so we'll take their guidance. Around 4 p.m. on August 8th, 2022, a team of FBI agents finished searching then former President Donald Trump's social club, sex dungeon, in a surprise raid and drove off in vans loaded with boxes that few expected would carry such extraordinarily sensitive cargo. In a hastily convened conference call that evening, Assistant Attorney General Matt Olson listened as his investigators described the hundreds of pages of top-secret records they found, some containing gravely serious material. Several detailed covert government operations and U.S. spying powers could get American operatives killed if the information fell into the wrong hands. Or into the wrong bathtub or toilet, I suppose. Instead of the documents being kept under lock and key in a government safe, agents found them spilling out of boxes in Trump's personal office, his residence, and even a bathroom shower. Olson turned to his top Justice Department expert on the mishandling of classified records, Julie Edelstein, to ask what they should do next. She delivered a startling assessment. If it was anybody else, we would arrest him tomorrow, Edelstein said. And I did see some interesting comments about that floating around yesterday, pointing out that, well, I mean, as interesting as that is, the Justice Department is supposed to be in the business of saying, it doesn't matter who he is, we're arresting him tomorrow. That's the way we enforce the law. But it isn't. It isn't. It really isn't. And we knew that. Knowingly taking classified documents outside of a secure government facility was a crime, plain and simple, she explained. Trying to conceal them after receiving a May subpoena to return all classified records, as Trump had, made the crime far worse, she argued. And you don't have to argue with me about that one. I understand it. Everybody does. But Olson's team knew that with Trump, all bets were off. The Justice Department would invariably treat the former president more gingerly. Trump has said recently that the search of Mar-a-Lago violated his civil rights and that he's considering authorizing the Justice Department to pay him $230 million in damages. And that's just the way you have to put it. He's not going to sue for the damages. He's just going to order the department to give them to him through administrative complaints rather than filing suit. Doesn't even have to. But these new revelations from an unprecedented probe run counter to Trump's insistence that he was mistreated and that he engaged in no criminal wrongdoing in withholding the top secret documents at his private social club. He did. In the aftermath of the 2022 search, Trump would erroneously claim that the classified documents investigation was based on manufactured evidence and driven by a Democratic administration hell-bent on prosecuting him to hurt his chances of winning re-election in 2024. A year after the 2022 search, after special counsel Jack Smith took over the case, a grand jury would indict Trump on 37 felony counts related to his mishandling and withholding of the records. The case, which prosecutors considered a slam dunk, then collapsed when an inexperienced federal judge appointed by Trump, Aileen Cannon, dismissed it on questionable legal grounds. I mean, very questionable legal grounds. This behind-the-scenes account reveals new details about the FBI's surprise search of Mar-a-Lago in August of 2022, the gravity of what investigators uncovered, and their fear about the potential damage to national security from Trump's casual storage of some of the country's most closely guarded secrets. It describes, for the first time, the Trump insider whose critical information helped spur the unprecedented search at the former president's home. It further details the tension between the Justice Department and the FBI at the highest levels. FBI Director Chris Wray rushed to protect agents' lives and release more information about the justification for the search as Trump whipped up his militant supporters with false claims that the FBI search was an attack by President Joe Biden's Justice Department. White House spokesperson, current, Abigail Jackson issued a statement claiming the court-approved search at Trump's club was illegal, but she did not address any of the specifics or the specific new reporting about the search. Her statement, I guess, the Biden DOJ's raid on President Trump's home was highly illegal, and yet MSDNC continues to provide cover for the witch hunt against the president, the statement read. This is another perfect example as to why the American people no longer trust the media. This account is drawn, they say, from interviews conducted for our book, Injustice, including with senior officials in the Trump and Biden administrations, government prosecutors and federal agents, and other firsthand witnesses to one of the most challenging periods in Justice Department history. Many agreed to be interviewed only on a condition of anonymity out of fear of retribution, and that's a good solid fear at this point. Next section, a critical witness inside Trump world. Let's find out about that. In the spring of 2022, FBI agents began sorting through about 15 boxes of documents from Trump's first presidency that he had finally returned in January at the National Archives' repeated request. This is January of 2022 that he returned them. Archives officials were shocked to discover many classified documents inside the boxes, which led the FBI and Justice Department to launch an investigation with two goals: making sure Trump had returned all the classified records, and then figuring out how such sensitive materials managed to escape government control. The archives issued a subpoena to Trump on May 11th, 2022, to return any classified records by May 24th. On May 18th, Jay Bratt, the head of the Justice Department's counterintelligence unit, and two FBI agents traveled to Lake Worth, Florida, to interview Molly Michael. Does that name ring a bell for you? I think I remember. She worked in Trump's post-presidential office after previously serving as an Oval Office assistant. She seemed nervous as the interview started, shivering in the frigid air conditioning. Michael, that is Molly Michael, was loyal to Trump, but she knew she had a duty to tell the truth to the government. Asked about records kept at Mar-a-Lago, she pulled out a printed copy of a picture that was worth 1,000 words, rows and rows of more than 80 boxes, resembling those used to pack for Trump's departure from the White House, stacked in a Mar-a-Lago club storage room. The photo, taken sometime in 2021 or 2022, alerted the FBI that Trump appeared to possess many more boxes than the 15 he had returned to the archives. Michael had transformed the fledgling investigation. Bratt briefed his FBI superiors by phone. There are more boxes. Olson, the Assistant Attorney General, winced when he heard the update. It meant other sensitive records were almost surely at Mar-a-Lago. We should have done a search, Olson said. Attorney General Merrick Garland, after being briefed by Olson, pressed for action. Can you believe it? He did. Shouldn't they search Mar-a-Lago now? Olson argued it was best to wait for Trump and his lawyers to respond to the subpoena on May 24th. Remember, it is at this point May 18th. Next section here. Oh, FBI, you do great work. Why do they call it that? You'll see. It's a quote. Trump's lawyer, Evan Corcoran, remember that guy? I don't think is he even in the Department of Justice at this point? Have we just left him by the roadside at this point? Trump's lawyer, Evan Corcoran, told Bratt that he needed to postpone the May 24th deadline. That'll make him upset, right? Let's just wait till May 24th and then do it. Well, you need to postpone that. Oh gosh, really? Why? Well, to allow more time to turn over any remaining records. No, would be my answer there. But okay, on June 2nd, he called Bratt to come to Mar-a-Lago the next day to collect the documents Corcoran had found. Bratt arrived at Mar-a-Lago with 3 FBI agents on June 3rd, finding a motorcade ready to take the Trump family to the airport as they were headed to Bedminster, New Jersey for the summer. Meeting in the club's dining room, Corcoran handed Bratt a red-welled envelope, I remember this, in which he had enclosed 38 classified documents with double-wrapped tape. Suddenly, Trump emerged through the dining room entryway and welcomed his visitors as Corcoran made introductions, starting with the FBI agents. Oh, FBI, Trump said, you do great work. Of course, he'd never believed that. But when he's in trouble and he's under their thumb, he's all kindness and grace, amazingly. When Corcoran introduced Bratt, Trump said, oh, DOJ, great reputation. But by the way, what kind of comment is that? Like, it's not, DOJ, for the former president. I mean, as opposed to thank you for your service or whatever, which is also throwaway, dopey stuff, but still, yeah. Oh, DOJ, great reputation. Yeah, kind of. I mean, whatever. Nice comment. Great reputation. What? Trump wanted to make sure his visitors knew they had his full cooperation. I'm an open book, Trump said. Anything you want, I'll give it to you. The book is Mein Kampf, but he is an open book. After Trump said his goodbyes, Corcoran led Bratt and the agents down a spiral staircase to an underground tunnel. Ooh. Then to the storage room, where Trump alleged his records were kept. Once inside the cramped room, the agents immediately saw that things had been moved and reorganized from the time that Michael's picture was taken. There were far fewer boxes. Corcoran told Bratt he would not let them open any of the boxes. The irony wasn't lost on the team. Trump was not quite an open book, or at least not an open box, I guess I would say. Next up, the surprise search. On the morning of August 8th, the FBI's chief spokesperson, Kathy Milwan, Milhoan, Milwan, perhaps, was poised to issue a public statement if the FBI search begun at Trump's club came to light. Alan Kohler, an FBI assistant director, called Milwan just after 4 p.m. to let her know agents had completed their search and left. It's done, he said. So I guess it didn't make a splash, which is what they did. That's how they planned it. They did it on purpose to try to keep it low key. You'll remember that. In fact, they said it wasn't even properly called a raid, but Trump wanted to play it up that way. A local Florida politics website broke the story of the FBI raid. They used the word raid around 6:40 p.m. Soon, Fox News ran a grainy nighttime video of an agent carrying a long gun amid the palm trees on club property. Oh, scary, right? Kohler was furious. No FBI agents had been carrying such a gun or wearing such gear. The cable news station was rerunning old stock footage of a U.S. Secret Service officer. You may recall they even went out of their way not to wear any of those windbreakers with FBI on them. They came in civilian clothing. There weren't any guns. They weren't mobbing the place. Nothing. They took care to do it that way. And Fox was just running scarier looking footage just to try and pretend that it was worse than it really was. Trump, who was in New York and had been alerted to the unfolding search, then made things, you'll never believe it, worse for the government. He seethed watching security camera footage of agents moving through his property, where he had hidden all of the property he had stolen from the United States of America, of course. He, just before 7 p.m., through all this seething, I guess, he issued a statement insisting that the FBI at that moment, quote, occupied his home, though agents had left 3 hours earlier. These are dark times for our nation, as my beautiful home, Mar-a-Lago in Palm Beach, Florida, is currently under siege, raided, and occupied by a large group of FBI agents, Trump wrote in his Truth social media platform. You've heard of it, I think. What did they say? There were 3 agents, no guns. Alrighty, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Let's continue reading, if you don't mind, the MSNBC excerpting from the Leonig Davis tome, Injustice, running through the day on the ground in the search of Mar-a-Lago, removing all the classified documents that Trump had stolen that they could still find. So to recap here where we left off, the FBI agreed to treat things gingerly, right? Not show up in FBI windbreakers that they usually do when they are making searches and seizures, coming in civilian clothing in markedly reduced numbers. I think 3 agents, no perimeter established, no guns, no nothing. But Fox News runs old video of a Secret Service agent patrolling Mar-a-Lago with a long gun at nighttime and pretended that there was this nighttime raid with the weapons out. And Trump runs with that and says, my home is being occupied and raided. Outrageous. And, of course, the FBI at that time is standing by with the statement explaining what they were doing, but they figured we don't even need it anymore. The news hasn't broken while we were there. The agents have packed up and gone. There's no reason to issue this statement anymore. But after the fact, hours later, Trump is just lying horrifically about it. So that makes them mad. Milhoan, who had the statement, was prepared to release their statement, but a DOJ spokesperson called to stop her, saying top Justice Department officials feared it could look political. Oh no, not that. Kohler was stunned. It was standard FBI procedure to publicly explain that a court had approved a search. The old video of an agent with a long gun quickly stirred up online criticism of the government. Trump was further amping up that vitriol with his own rhetoric. Late that night during Olson's conference call with his team, Spratt described the discovery of hundreds of pages of sensitive records as extraordinary. That's the word that he used. I guess it's put in quotes here. Okay, so the FBI began the first careful steps of assessing the classified material. They were shocked to learn even the most senior Justice Department counterintelligence officials, the people trained to do this kind of work, were not authorized to even see them. You see what we're getting at here? Within 24 hours, Kohler gave Garland and Deputy Attorney General Lisa Monaco their first briefing on the search results, summarizing the sensitivity of the inventory so far. Monaco, who had spent hours of her life reviewing classified secrets in sensitive compartmented information facilities, the SCIFs, right, and in the White House Situation Room, worried about the potential danger to national security, and mulled how to alert agencies whose spies and covert operations might have been imperiled by the lack of security surrounding the documents. Who do we need to call right now? She asked Kohler. Olson wanted to eyeball the records himself, and when he arrived at the FBI's Washington field office, a case agent assigned to be his handler steered him to a specially secured room with documents in 3 stacks. One stack contained all the documents returned to the National Archives in January. A second pile involved the documents returned by Corcoran in the Redweld folder in June. Their final pile, considerably taller than the one from Corcoran, held the documents seized in the August 8th search. Olson donned a pair of rubber gloves as he looked through these stacks, with 2 people standing by as minders. This is an FBI agent, high-ranking FBI agent, at the Washington field office looking through this thing, but he still has to have 2 people standing there as minders. That's how sensitive this information is. The gloves underscored the fact that these pages were evidence in a criminal case. Olson didn't try to read every word, but instead attempted to determine the severity of the national security threat if they had fallen into the hands of people without proper clearance. And remember, although at that point there was no evidence of anybody else having handled the documents, the point is that they were there to be handled, and that if that had happened, they needed to develop that evidence. But what were they developing evidence of? What would be lost? How seriously do they need to take the search? The very fact that those things were unsecured is only stage 1 of all of this. You have to assume that somebody saw it. Now you have to go about either proving that no one did or finding out who, if anyone, did, and then what to do about it. Olson's minders told him about a 4th stack of documents stored in a separate safe, explaining that only one agent in the field office was even approved to handle them. Each of the documents in the safe bore a ticket with coding that described its unique handling instructions, above and beyond the strict approvals for highly sensitive, top secret, and sensitive compartmentalized information. So again, they go to the Washington field office, they get escorted to a room to sort through the evidence with 2 minders on either side of you, 3 stacks in evidence, 1, everything that they returned on their own, 2, everything that Corcoran returned in that Redweld folder that he taped up, 3, everything that they went later on and seized. But was it everything that they had seized? No, it wasn't. There's a 4th stack, so secret that it couldn't be stacked up next to these other things and had to be held in a safe in a different room because no one in the office but one guy was authorized to see anything about those documents. That was just in the bathroom, lying around on the floor at Pervalago. Olson got on the phone with his counsel to read those codes aloud one by one to determine if he had permission to view them. Some of the documents were so restricted that top Justice Department security officials reacted with surprise to the code names. They had never even heard of them before. Some involved special access programs that required the president or a cabinet member to grant approval to view. That's what was in the bathroom. That's what's next to the toilet. In this painstaking way, Olson, the Assistant Attorney General responsible for the Justice Department's efforts to protect national security, learned that a handful of documents stored in boxes throughout Trump's club were so sensitive that even he didn't have authorization to look at them. Again, his job is Assistant Attorney General responsible for the DOJ's efforts to protect national security. Can't even investigate it himself. That's how bad this was. Outside of Washington, Trump's erroneous claims about this being a bogus investigation were having an effect. In Western Pennsylvania, I forgot about this. In Western Pennsylvania, a Trump supporter began posting threatening messages to the far-right social media website Gab, saying that after the surprise search, quote, every single piece of beep, okay, I'll beep it for you, who works for the FBI in any capacity deserves to die. You've declared war on us, and now it's open season on you. And of course, if you say something mean about Charlie Kirk these days, you'll get thrown in jail. This guy says everybody who works for the FBI deserves to die. Well, they did have to go and arrest this guy. A day later, and 300 miles away in Cincinnati, a Navy veteran who had been posting about the search tried to break through bulletproof glass at the entrance of the FBI field office, wielding an AR-15 style assault rifle and a nail gun. The gunman fled, and hours later was killed in a standoff with police. Truth Social postings in the suspect's name warned viewers about the Mar-a-Lago search. Get whatever you need to be ready for combat. We must not tolerate this once. The same day as the attack, the FBI agents who signed the paperwork for the Mar-a-Lago search warrant were evacuated temporarily from their homes for their own safety. Documents with their names had begun to circulate online. The agents' identities had been redacted from filings on the court's website, but a copy of the original paperwork was left, I guess as standard practice, at Mar-a-Lago. FBI officials surmised that Trump's team had leaked their names. It's the only conclusion you can come to, endangering the agents and their families. So how about that? So not only was he just caught red-handed with all that sensitive information, but he's also given the sensitive information for his own case of, well, these are the names of the FBI agents who were here and who conducted the search. You'll learn that at trial. But in the meantime, are you supposed to leak the names to the public? No, you're not. We redact them from court filings for that reason. Oh, well, to hell with that. Going to do it anyway. Just so you know. And of course, he has since returned to the scene of the crime and had a giant party there in front of everybody. That being yesterday's news, of course. Anyway, I just thought I would update you on that one because, gosh, it's actually fairly important. Another long read that I thought I might add to the mix today. There are many. But I should, let me add this here. I have a piece from Philip Bump, I think, right? Let's open this thing up. It's his new, probably Substack related newsletter. But actually, I think it's one of his older ones that he may have run even when he was at the Washington Post. It's a particular interesting passion, I guess, of his. It's sort of data graphics and data presentation called How to Read This Chart. And he loves charting things and doing data visualizations. This one is titled The Web That Tried to Steal the Presidency. And I think this is an expansion on something Marcy Wheeler was talking about the other day about information that was, I guess, more or less inadvertently injected into the timeline in Trump defending himself over something. But let me launch into the reading of it, and then I can see if it sparks a memory of exactly what it was that Empty Wheel had said about this. But here we are with a Chapter 1, and I know this gets weedy too, Philip Bump and his charts, just the way Marcy sometimes does. Chapter 1, what What is it that happens when we first practice to deceive? I forget. Yes, the tangled web that we weave, right? If you are anything like me, I don't know if you are, you tuned into a cable news coverage of the Capitol riot on January 6th and thought to yourself, this is bad. Okay, well, that's pretty broad. I think I'm a little bit like that, right? Well, that's just us. A sizable and Donald Trump loyal segment of the population looked at it and thought, where'd Antifa get all that Trump merchandise? Or, gosh, I'm spotting lots of FBI here. Or in some cases, hey, pretty good. The riot, of course, was the culmination of months of effort by Trump and his allies to subvert the results of the 2020 presidential election so he could stay in office. This effort to functionally overturn democracy led, as one might expect, to a federal criminal investigation, one that ultimately led to Trump's indictment, which I think I can safely say he didn't like. So it, like the Russia investigation before it, has become the focus of one of the tentacles of Trump's campaign of retribution. Anything that can be done to undermine the 2020 election probe is welcomed by the president. So, as with efforts to quote-unquote prove that the 2020 election was stolen, any number of his allies have scrambled to meet the demand. One of them is Iowa Senator Chuck Grassley. Yes, this is what Marcy was talking about, if I remembered to put it on the air the other day. One of them is Chuck Grassley, the Senate equivalent of the House's egregiously dishonest oversight committee. Grassley this week released nearly 200 subpoenas from special counsel Jack Smith's investigation into the post-2020 election efforts, documents that sought information or testimony from a range of organizations and individuals. The scale of the document dump was the point. The argument was simply in the vein of, look at how deranged these guys were. It occurs to me that we might not have, I may have read Marcy's piece on it and thought, oh no, this is going to be one of those things that's too weedy and confusing to just simply start with at the outset. We need to do some background discussion, and we might not have done it, but we may have. I can't remember. But this is basically what? A renewed effort by Republicans across the board, but in particular Republicans on Capitol Hill, to allege that the investigation into January 6th, the investigation into the overall efforts to overturn the 2020 elections, up to and including, because Jack Smith handled both that and the documents case we were just talking about, again, all witch hunt, all devised by the deep state to target poor Trump, who has done nothing wrong, doesn't everybody understand, et cetera, et cetera. And the new angle is part of the investigation into January 6th included getting subpoenas for communications information, telephones, cell phones, emails, et cetera, of at least some members of Congress, Republican members of Congress, which they just basically look at without going any further into any further questioning about why, because they don't care. They're just mad about it. But they're basically saying this is a giant violation of our constitutional protections, our prerogatives as members of Congress. How outrageous. This is the Biden government spying on Republicans for partisan reasons. Why else would they be spying on only Republicans? Of course, that's just one way of spinning the fact that only Republicans were participating in the conspiracy to try to overturn the results of the 2020 election. Democrats would not be participating in that conspiracy. They believed correctly that they had won the 2020 election, and in efforts to overturn them and to send fabricated, forged electoral college results to the Capitol to try to pretend that they had simply won, was not on the Democratic agenda. And that's actually something you should investigate. And only Republicans would have been involved in that. Which ones? It wasn't as though they taped everybody and tried to find out that way. They had a very particular set of targets. And that's what we're looking at here. So anyway, Grassley was saying, look how many people they subpoenaed records for. This is a general warrant for all Republicans. But it, A, doesn't come close, and B, ended up revealing, in some cases for the first time, how many members of Congress and Republican staffers and with what reason the FBI believed they needed to be surveilled, how many were surveilled, why they needed to be surveilled, and how much evidence there was that they had in fact participated in this conspiracy. And I think Marcy's point that day was, yeah, Grassley has actually, added fuel to the fire here, but under the guise of putting out the fire, in his view. So, yeah, let me continue with what Philip Bump has said here. Looking at the documents, something stood out to me. It depicts thoroughness, not overreach. And buried in that thoroughness are patterns. Ooh, not those. Implied connections between people and organizations that hint at the scale of the effort. The word implied is important there. When person A is asked for any information about person B, it doesn't mean that Jack Smith knew the two were in cahoots. It just means that Smith and his team had reason to believe they might have been in contact. That said, something interesting happens when you, as I did, walk through the 1,700 plus pages of documents and correlate all of the persons A, and organizations B. You get a network of connections, one that also inherently highlights participants more important to the network. It's like one of those word clouds, right? The bigger and more prominent the word in the cloud, that means it appeared more times. He did a different kind of search, mapping out all these connections. And where you see more heavily trafficked paths of connection, you begin to understand who were the important hubs in this work, this crime. And it's displayed right here using the open source visualization program Gephi, Gephi. I created a visualization of those networks, and here's an early draft. Here it is. The Web of January 6th Subpoenas, version 1. And there's no sense in my trying to describe it to you. It's very ornate, and there are a lot of entries on here, and you really have to zoom in to magnify them enough to even see the names in use here. But suffice to say, there's a lot of traffic and activity. Now, what's cool about the tool is that it algorithmically sorts the individuals and organizations into clusters based on incoming and outgoing links. In other words, the image above required no manipulation of the points by me. It's how the software understands their importance and relation. There are a few things that stand out in that image, most notably that the Trump campaign, that is to say Donald J. Trump for President Incorporated as an entity, is the largest node. That is because it has the most mentions in subpoenas, which, given the context, isn't really surprising. It sits just above a muddy collection of other campaign and political entities and is tied into clusters scattered around the image. That version of the graphic used one sorting algorithm. It's a bit messy, though, so I switched to another, yielding a much clearer, cleaner layout of the web of connections with Trump's campaign at the center. I guess I would describe these things because there's, a conspiracy theory behind it all, a little bit like the posting, the famous memes of posting things up on the wall and connecting them with strands of yarn, right? To connect the things where you think there's a bridge and it ends up looking like a crazy web. All right. Well, that's what the first one looked like. The second one, slightly more organized and slightly better spaced out, as he says, a much cleaner layout of the connections. So this is the Web of January 6th Subpoenas version 2. And as with above, it includes, I forgot to mention the different classes of entities being connected here: organizations, individuals, and financial institutions. Same three categories here. Now, if you want to peruse a much larger, he says, version of the graphic above, click on it. It's very big. Now let's zoom into it a bit. At right and a bit below the middle, you can see, if it was in front of you, and it will be in front of you later on today, you can see a number of organizations tied to both the former Trump campaign manager Brad Parscale and Trump's political committees. Parscale's name is mentioned a lot, in part because he's tied to so many of these companies that Smith's team believed to be involved in the post-election efforts. To the left of the president's campaign sits the Republican National Committee and a galaxy of staffers who worked with it. Many of these nodes are small because they're mentioned rarely and often only in context to one another. Staffer A was asked for communications with Staffer B, for example. Near the RNC, you'll see some other familiar names too. It's like a Where's Waldo that's mostly odd laws. Okay, some references I don't understand. In a cloud around Parscale sits a number of other rarely named individuals, people identified by the campaign as Trump electors in states that he lost. They generally connect back to people tied to the campaign, like Communications Director Tim Murtaugh. If you look very closely, you can also see one of the most important elements of the connective tissue here. Many of the subpoenas target financial and technology companies. Organizations asked for information about bank or email accounts. They're small in our visualization because they're not generally mentioned as targets of subpoenas, but those subpoenas are useful in tying people to organizations and to each other. Except Chuck Grassley forgot that anybody could glean this stuff from this. That alone helps give the lie to Grassley's framing. He claims that Jack Smith sought records for over 400 Republican targets. But Google isn't a Republican target. PNC Bank isn't a Republican target. And of course, Smith had a very good reason for subpoenaing scores of Trump-adjacent actors. As you'll recall, they tried to overturn the election, stoked outrage that contributed to the Capitol riot. Maybe Grassley's mad that Smith didn't subpoena Antifa. But yes, inflating the numbers. Well, 400 targets were subpoenaed. Yes. 400 Republican targets? No. Chapter 2, The Art of Lying with Charts. Despite headwinds out of D.C., there remain academics doing important work in evaluating how and why misinformation spreads on social media. Among those at the forefront of this effort are researchers from the University of Washington's Center for an Informed Public. By the way, very much a target of the Trump administration. This week, members of that group published new research looking at an interesting subset of online misinformation, misleading or corrupted data visualizations. That'll be of some specific interest to Phil. They cite an example with which you may be familiar. During the 2024 campaign, Trump regularly highlighted a chart that he insisted showed how much better he was at handling immigration than President Biden. But it was riddled with inaccuracies and misrepresentations, as, he says, I wrote back in May of 2024. As it turns out, that chart originated with Senator Ron Johnson's office, oh boy, going through various iterations before Team Trump seized it and revised it. I guess is that it here? Lineage 2, a Senate visual aid moved to Trump rally centerpiece. Okay, so this is another complex and weird, not as complex looking, but certainly as complex and weird data visualization showing how this visual aid that was being used in the Senate ended up in Trump's hand and was changed over time to become more and more misleading. But there's a reason that they did this. Data visualizations carry a lot of credibility, regardless of whether they are accurate or not. Researchers Priya Dawka and Nina Lutz explained in an email, from the user perspective, combating misleading visualizations requires us as audiences to be skeptical of the data visualizations we're being fed, especially when these charts can be easily designed or modified by anyone. They noted that among the changes the Trump team made to Johnson's chart was to remove an indicator that many of those apprehended at the border had been quickly removed, giving the impression that many more adult men had come into the country than actually had. Doing so, Dawka and Lutz explain, helps underscore a criminality framing of immigrants that the Trump campaign and now administration push quite often. Data visualizations, like other visual content, can be stylized and curated to tell any story, they wrote, and it's important that users remember there's a lot of design choices made before they see a visualization. The good news, dear reader, is that all of my charts, Philip says, are free from subjectivity and perfectly reflect the nature of the world as it is. Okay, that might be a little self-serving, but I think that's the point he's trying to get across here. Interlude, let's talk. All right, we'll read this before we take our last break here. Now, don't quote me on this, he says, but I think I've figured out how to let you reply directly to this email. And if you, or reply to this email, and I guess because it was a emailed newsletter originally, if you do reply, it should send a message back to me. It should. I'm still figuring this out. Like a grandfather suddenly handed his grandkids iPhone. If not, you can always email me directly. Okay, so basically he's saying if you are reading this and you have questions, you can pose them to me directly and we will engage in discussion. So that probably could have been skipped over, but then I only had about 20 seconds before the break anyway. So, all right, it was wasted. That's true, and I'm not going to get it back. But we'll be back in 2 minutes for more from Philip Bump. Difficult, but I believe necessary.
Sup, fam? It's your boy Darwin, a.k.a. Darwin_Darko, a.k.a. the most reasonable man in America, a.k.a. KITM's senior black correspondent. You might remember me from such recordings as Spacemen vs. Space Cadets and We Need to Talk About Joe Biden. Today, I want to bring you good news about that thing you've been struggling with. Do you suffer from giving too much of a damn? Do you turn on the series of tubes and find yourself outraged at the particular way some news organization strung some sentences together only to realize, nope, this is not some fictional hellscape? Well, guess what? You no longer have to accept the life of giving too much of a damn. You can do something about it, because even you, yes you, can be a show contributor. Now I know what you're thinking. Hey, Mr. Most Reasonable Man in America, I'm not some professional podcast talking guy. Don't worry about it. Do you have a smartphone or some other electronic recording device? Well, that's all you need. You too can have a segment where you can read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Fair warning though, side effects may include general punditry, having opinions and hot takes, getting stuff off your chest, and hearing your own voice. If your recording lasts longer than 5 to 7 minutes, please consult kagrox@gmail.com. That's KAGROX@gmail.com.
All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. We're finding out live and in real time exactly what we're dealing with here from the Philip Bump story. Guess what? As it turns out, the interlude here is actually signaling the end of the part of the article that was relevant to our discussion, because he then moves on to newsletter. One of the dangers of reading these things in newsletter form is that he then moves on to another data visualization issue. Although, again, the title of this piece is The Web That Tried to Steal the Presidency. But chapter 3 of it here, after the little brief interlude, moves on to a totally different subject, it looks like. Chapter 3 is mapping the damage done to Tesla. And it's not, although it may be in part because of his participation in the Trump administration, this is all really strictly about the damage done to sales for Tesla. Now, down at chapter 4, chart attack here, there's more. The site More Perfect Union created a network-style visualization showing the donors who gave to Trump and how they've benefited from his administration. And that seems a little bit more in tune with what we were talking about. Why is it's not clear to me what the Tesla part is doing in here and whether it's got any value to the story as I thought he was telling it. But it's not, it's really just unclear to me what he's trying to get at with the Tesla information. Now, down at like I said, down here, chapter 4, let's skip chapter 3 for a second here. And see, is there more that was, I apologize for the scattered nature of this, but all I can do is point to Philip Bump on this and say, it's not clear to me where you're going or how you're connecting these things. From the New York Times, we get this look on how there's more data visualization, and it seems to touch on the topic of the title of this piece, but it's really just not at all clear what the connection is here. So I don't know what to tell you. I'm going to have to stop at this point with the Philip Bump thing. I think there might be some percussive head injury going on from looking at these complicated webs, and there's so much going on here and so much blurring and overlap over things that it looks like one of those strobe effect situations, and may have been giving him some disruption to his brain waves. That is not the rest of this piece. Just doesn't hold together with the title of it, and there's no clear connective tissue or conclusion to it that ties it back together. Very weird. Maybe now we have, well, we know this. He'll respond to questions about it. So if you read it and you're similarly confused, I would recommend you go and take a look and maybe pose your questions. All right. I got another couple of things here to include in our final segment, including a message behind the scenes on Blue Sky from Greg, suggesting that we read a piece from the Bulwark, which is something Greg suggests all the time, of course, because he reads it. But let me see if I can work it in after a different detour. There's something else sitting toward the top of Instapaper that I wanted to read that came through via Raw Story yesterday, but it's connected in that it has to do with Aileen Cannon, who is, of course, the judge that ended up throwing out some of the important parts of the Jack Smith case against Donald Trump that is related both to the January 6th insurrection and the documents case. Undo is how the thing begins in the title. Undo is a quote from somebody. Judge Cannon slammed by appeals court after Jack Smith's report on Trump delayed. David Edwards reports for Raw Story. Undo, I guess, something is undo. Oh, that seems like an awkward thing. Why don't even include it, really? Undo what? Well, we'll find out when we read about it. Maybe it just didn't belong in the headline. That would be my critique as an editor here. The 11th Circuit Court of Appeals has ordered U.S. District Judge Aileen Cannon to stop delaying the release of the remaining parts. I didn't even realize there were remaining parts, or I had forgotten maybe. Remaining parts of Special Counsel Jack Smith's report on President Donald Trump's alleged mishandling of classified documents. And come on, it's not more than alleged, but I guess you have to do that since he hasn't been convicted because he never went to trial on it. In September, the Knight, K-N-I-G-H-T, Knight, First Amendment Institute at Columbia University and American Oversight asked the appeals court to force Cannon to release the report. Cannon had blocked former President Joe Biden's Justice Department from releasing the report in January. By keeping this order in place, Judge Cannon is undermining both accountability and the rule of law, American Oversight Director Chioma Chukwu noted. Trump appointed Cannon, of course, as you know, during his first term. There is no legitimate reason for the report's continued suppression, that is, and it should be posted on the court's public docket without further delay, Knight Institute Director Jamil Jaffer insisted. On Monday, the appeals court ordered Cannon to stop delaying the report's release. Petitioners filed their motion on February 14th and again on February 14th and February 24th, 2025, and filed notification on July 7th and July 10th, 2025, informing the district court that their motions had been fully briefed for more than 90 days. To date, the district court has not ruled or conducted any further proceedings on the pending motions, the court noted. You see what's happening here and why they had to appeal? Accordingly, petitioners have established undue delay. That's what's undue. In resolution of their motions to intervene, and the petitions for writs of mandamus are held in abeyance for a period of 60 days to allow the district court to fully resolve the motions. Otherwise, I guess that's what they're saying, is that if she were in the next 60 days not to respond to their demand that the report be released, she might then be subject to the issuance of a writ of mandamus insisting that she do so. That is an interesting development all by itself and worth keeping an eye on. And I guess she's succeeded in her goal, at least in making otherwise interested news readers in the country forget that there even was such a report by delaying it for so long. Wow, that's pretty dangerous all by itself. All right, I thought I would add that to the mix, and I'm just trying to see whether there's any other pieces that might have been or should be added to this mix if or before leaving it for a slightly different angle on all the news for the day. Yeah, I guess that's really about it at this point. And so I will switch over in subjects. This is I'll switch to the subject that Greg prompted us on, but not yet the piece that he has sent to me. Or maybe I'll begin with that one and then I'll backtrack to the other one I thought. Let me just make that call on the fly and read this piece because it's rather interesting and surprising. And maybe in light of the change in direction in Dick Cheney's thoughts, let's say, about the imperial presidency in the closing months of his life. Some other positions have shifted here too. All right, so the Bulwark piece is attributed to William Crystal, you may remember that guy, Andrew Egger, and Jim Swift. And I think Egger and Swift we've read from or heard from time to time through the Bulwark as well. And let's just get right to it. It's one of my own subjects. Trump is right. Oh, no, we don't want that. The filibuster should die. Oh, well, maybe we have something there. Yeah, you must have noticed that in the last day or two, Trump has been insisting that the Senate ought to abolish the filibuster once and for all, or at least abolish it with respect to their ability to get past a filibuster of taking up consideration once again of the House-passed version of the continuing resolution that would reopen government. Let me just add, by the way, that even if they did so, one of the reasons I think that they won't do so, besides the politics and procedure and implications and optics of it, is that the House passed, one, the Senate never really loves giving into the House on anything. But that wasn't even the one that I was going to bring up. The one I was going to bring up is much more practical. The House CR, if the Senate were to decide with or without the filibuster to get out of the way and to pass it, the House CR only runs through, I think, November 15th, maybe 14th, but 15th. So at this point, 10 days of government operations before we'd be shut down again. So it's really just at this point not worth considering. If they were considering it earlier and they wanted to think about getting rid of the filibuster to get to it, if they had done it a month ago, that would have been worth trying, I suppose. But this is just another reason why it wouldn't actually happen now. But what Trump is telling him to do is either get rid of the filibuster entirely or create another exception, another workaround, and say, all right, no filibuster allowed for clean, quote unquote, clean CR. That would just cause all sorts of problems. But clean CRs when there's a government shutdown and something. Could you do it? Yes. Should you do it? Meh. Is it a wise way of pushing through the otherwise probably still laudable goal of getting rid of the filibuster for legislation and just basically for everything in the Senate? I don't know. But Donald Trump, in pushing for this for the fifth time, essentially, what can I tell you? He exposes the lie, for instance, of his own party's members on Capitol Hill trying to pin this shutdown on Democrats. If you can get rid of the filibuster with a partisan majority, and then once that's done, reopen the government, then it can't be that it's the case that Democrats are at fault here. If you can do this but refuse to, whose fault is it? So that's interesting all by itself. But here we are. Trump is right. The filibuster should die. A broken clock is right twice a day. This time he's right about a broken legislative process, says this team, who, very interesting how the shoe has been put on different feet over the years about the filibuster. Were no doubt howling in protest of Harry Reid's having done what he did, but had previously, of course, spent the period of 2004 and 2005 insisting that they should be getting rid of the filibuster so that George W. Bush could get his judicial appointments, which were then being blocked by Senate Democrats. Anyway, there are elections tonight, say the team of Crystal, Egger, and Swift. You may have heard. Not only will we get new governors to be in Virginia and New Jersey and a new mayor-elect in New York City, we will also get our first really clear sense of what direction the Democratic Party is heading. I don't know if they're qualified to say that, but all right. Among the questions to answer, will centrist Democratic candidates for governor prosper in Virginia and New Jersey? Will Virginians really cast ballots for a guy who fantasized about the murder of a Republican lawmaker and his children? Will congressional redistricting go forward in California? Exactly how excited are New Yorkers over the last-minute endorsements Andrew Cuomo received from, checks notes, Donald Trump, Elon Musk, and Stephen Miller? And of course, can Bill Ackman literally tweet through a Zoran Mamdani victory? And how long will those tweets be? We'll be covering it live at 8 p.m. Eastern, if you are interested in doing that. But Down with the Filibuster comes up next by Andrew Egger. Donald Trump has set his sights on the filibuster, ranting about it as recently as 8:21 a.m. this morning. The Senate's longstanding convention requires 60 votes to pass most legislation. No. The president grumbles is a kink in the hose of his governing agenda, one that lets the Democratic minority stop most of the bills he wants to pass and even shut down the government by withholding their votes. His solution? Republicans should just abandon the filibuster altogether, which they could do pretty easily. All it takes is 50 votes. Hey, when he's right, he's right. In recent years, it has typically been progressives who have chafed at the filibuster. The 2021 book Kill Switch, written by Adam Gentleson, who served as a top staffer for Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid in the 2010s, right about the time that I had to show up repeatedly in his office and explain how this stuff works and why they should do it. But I'm not in the book, nor am I getting paid for any of this, by the way. If they kill the filibuster, everybody in America owes me $1,000. So pay up. You're welcome. I know it makes you nervous, but we knew this was coming even when we were advocating for it 15 years ago. But it feels right, in a sense, getting paid 15 years late. But you're welcome, America. We're going to have a majoritarian government. Unfortunately, we're in the hands of an autocratic majority right now, so the timing stinks. But hey, what can you do? All right. So where were we? Kill Switch, Adam Gentleson's book, laid out the argument, although he didn't. I did. In Gentleson's telling, the filibuster is a pointless vestigial mechanism that has never been good for anything but paralyzing lawmaking. Trying to pass legislation in the modern Senate is like trying to drive down the interstate with the emergency brake on. There's a footnote. Who knows? We're going to skip it. Many conservatives have long responded by saying, yeah, buddy, that's the point. Passing new laws should be a struggle, even during the single-party control of D.C., giving the minority at least a small say in shaping policy is a safeguard against the too rapid, too partisan reworkings of the U.S. Code. Now, I'm a conservative myself. Again, this is, which one are we reading here? Andrew Egger. A believer in the virtues of slow, careful change. In other words, I am pretty much the target audience for this argument, but lately I've been wondering whether it's been rendered obsolete by recent events. I think so. When you look around the country right now, do you see a federal government whose policy regime is being held judiciously in check by minority-respecting Senate procedures? Of course not. Instead, Congress sits gridlocked and the president runs the country by fiat, helping himself repeatedly to powers and money that rightly belong to the legislature. He has claimed authority to set government spending levels wherever he likes, to levy any tariffs he likes, to commit acts of war against any country he likes, to decline to enforce laws of Congress like the TikTok ban whenever he likes. Gridlock has enervated our legislators, made them lazy. Trump might as well grab those powers. It's not like we were using them anyway. Meanwhile, the Senate filibuster-induced gridlock has even given significant political cover to Trump's "let's just do it and be legends" populist pitch. The jalopy that is Congress is struggling laboriously down the highway, fighting the brake, smoke puffing ominously from under the hood, and here comes Trump saying, "Come on, baby, have you ever been on a motorcycle?" Other supposed benefits of the filibuster keep conspicuously failing to materialize. In theory, the 61-vote legislative threshold is supposed to induce some bipartisanship. Meanwhile, we're breaking the record for longest government shutdown. There are better arguments for the filibuster, including that it does still frustrate some parts of Trump's agenda, and of course this is the reason Trump wants to do away with it. But the filibuster constrains the president only in ways that are distorted and strange. The only major policy bills that make it through the Senate these days are passed via the odd auxiliary method of budget reconciliation, which lets the Senate dodge the filibuster for certain bills that deal with federal spending and revenues. In practice, the system perversely ties Trump and his lawmakers more closely together, since the only hope for getting anything significant passed is to graft it onto one of the major reconciliation packages, like the one big beautiful bill that the president spearheads and promises to sign. Whatever Chesterton's fence conservatives like me might prefer, you tell me what's going on, the era of swift radical political change is upon us. So the question now becomes, who will develop, deliver, and set the course of that change? Will it be Congress or will it be the president? Speaking for myself, I've had my fill and plenty more of the latter option. I'd like to see a world where the legislatures get a say, and with the voters getting to render their judgments every 2 as opposed to 4 years. And that means a world where we reevaluate the structures that have helped tip the balance of power so far toward the executive. Maybe there was a time when Congress getting too muscular with its lawmaking was a real political concern. That's not the situation in which we find ourselves today. In a fight between Donald Trump and the Senate Majority Leader John Thune, I'd take the Thune side 99 times out of 100. But when it comes to the filibuster, Thune is a general fighting the last war. Why not take a little power back for Congress, John? You're the ones who are supposed to have it in the first place. Okay, interesting. I guess the reason why this thing had more bylines on it than just Egger is that Crystal offers up next, I guess is their Bulwark newsletter, the Dick Cheney obit. I don't know I guess for balance's sake, I would ordinarily say, well, we'll read William Crystal's obit of Dick Cheney, but that's not what we do on this program. You know where to go if you feel like you needed balance about Dick Cheney's life. Anyway, I thought that was of some interest. Then they take some chance to take a couple shots at Jay Jones during today's election down further. And then let's see. Now I also see there's some Laura Loomer news down there too. All right, I'm going to stop at this point, double back on the filibuster, and head back to Instapaper for the, what was it? Talking Points memo entry on this front. It's one of several other stories that are sort of sitting out there, but as we were on the topic, maybe we'll close out with this one. Trump wants to abolish the filibuster? ? Please proceed, degenerate. Okay. This was actually published on Halloween, and is it Josh Marshall's own? Yeah, one of the newsletters off of the Talking Points memo called The Back Channel. So anyway, this one happens to be sitting here, and you know what? Not available because it's a subscription piece. Although I guess if I read it in, not Pocket, but Instapaper. We can get through to it. The lead here, as you've probably already heard, Donald Trump went on Truth Social late last night, the 30th, and announced that the time had come for his senators to pass a clean continuing resolution to reopen the government with a simple majority vote by abolishing the filibuster. The only proper response to this is bring it on. It's never good to cower, of course. Give it your best shot is always the proper posture, but if Trump is able to accomplish this, I'm skeptical, he says, more on that in a moment, that's great news. Can we continue in Instapaper? Yes. This is such an important point that it is worth itemizing the reasons why it is so. First, the Senate filibuster is a core reason for the decline of trust in government over the last quarter century. The evolution of its use helped sever, I think it says severe, but sever the tethers connecting election results and governmental action. A party wins an election and its promised actions never happen. The filibuster is both the cause of and excuse for gridlock. Second, the filibuster provides an overwhelming structural advantage for Republicans, a big reason to be skeptical it will happen, that is to say, abolishing it. More on that in a moment as well. Republicans want tax cuts and judicial nominations, neither of which the filibuster affects. To the extent Republicans want non-budget/tax legislation, it's generally stuff like national abortion bans that Republican leaders are happy for an excuse not to touch. They're also no more likely to pass something like that post-filibuster. The Democrats' agenda is always legislation-focused, actual laws that institute reforms, create services, safety nets, anything. It's in the nature of being the party of government. The Senate filibuster is a permanent bar for any Democratic legislation Republicans oppose, regardless of which party is in the majority. Remember that Obamacare only passed in 2009 and 2010 because two successive wave elections had briefly, for about 6 months, given Democrats the now unimaginable margin of 60 Senate votes. Anyone who tells you the filibuster affects both parties equally is either lying or has been sleeping for the past 30 years, which sounds like a really great option, actually. Third, because the filibuster is a permanent bar on any Democratic legislation, any reforms to protect the Republic against Trumpism are all ruled out in advance. As long as the filibuster exists, it means any future Democratic presidency or trifecta is simply a replay of the Biden presidency, a short breather before the further advance of Trumpist autocracy. Yes, that carries over the theme from earlier in the show, which actually was about carrying over the theme from the Bush presidency to the very next Republican presidency, regardless of 3 different Democratic terms in the interim. Anyway, none of the above is new. It applied in 2021 and 22 when Senators Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema refused any effort to limit or abolish the filibuster. These are the long-term structural reasons why opposing the filibuster should be a litmus test for every Democratic senator. You're welcome. But there are also short-term and immediate reasons why, from the Democrats' point of view, the timing is great. Ooh, timing that's great. Democrats refuse to give their funding support for Trump's autocracy and draconian cuts to health care. They've hung about as tough and as long as anyone imagined. That has inspired new confidence in their voters and prospective voters. It has also dramatically raised public awareness about the crippling cuts to health care Republicans chose to fund their mammoth tax cuts. It's provided a month-long spectacle of Republicans digging in, insisting on keeping the government shut down rather than just allowing people to keep their coverage. From a messaging and political standpoint, it's been a disaster for the GOP. In a revealing update this morning, a couple days ago, the D.C. Insider Sheet Punch Bowl pondered how it can be that voters don't realize that the whole thing is Democrats' fault and that Democrats should take the blame. The bafflement is a good reminder of how much D.C. remains wired for the GOP. At this point, it seems clear that Trump not only doesn't want to compromise, but doesn't even want to engage. It's less a hardball negotiating stance than his lack of focus. He's consumed by his ballroom and domestic military deployments and foreign trips and barely seems aware that the government is shut down at all. We're also now days away from the new Obamacare price hikes being locked in. Not anymore. I'm certainly not saying Democrats should throw in the towel. My point is that they've already gotten most of the political gains that they can get from this. Indeed, if you're inclined to be cynical, you could say that in narrowly electoral terms, it's almost the best of both worlds for them. There was a debate leading up to the shutdown about whether it made sense for Democrats to demand that Republicans repeal or soften their health care cuts. Those cuts will be causing pain across the country throughout 2026. Voters will be looking for someone to blame. Why should Democrats use their political capital to save Republicans from the electoral consequences of their own awful actions? The argument went. And in narrowly political terms, it was a pretty good argument. If this ends now with Trump forcing the abolition of the filibuster, Dems won't have had to choose. They'll have fought, never given in, and also be in a position to reap the political backlash against Trump's taking health care coverage from millions and hiking the rates for millions more. Democrats don't need to pine or anguish over what the moral choice is here, political benefit versus getting people back to their health care. Their choice is abstract and purely notional. Trump and Senate Republicans are either going to do this or not. Democrats have no input in the decision. I'm only noting that in political terms, it leaves them having their cake and eating it too, which brings me back to my skepticism this will ever happen. Senate Republicans know better than anyone that the filibuster is their secret weapon. Trump doesn't give a crap about any of this stuff. But these senators care a lot, and they have a longer time horizon than the next 3 years. We say that Trump gets everything he wants from the GOP, but that's not entirely true. When there's concerted GOP opposition to something, he doesn't get his way, at least not in more than a superficial way. That's especially so here because the entire thing isn't something Trump cares much about. Tariffs, soldiers in cities, those things excite him. This is just his 10th idea for how to force the Democrats' hand, along with Dodgy 2.0, which mostly didn't happen, threats to cut SNAP funding, hammering Dems over hating the military, and a bunch of other things they've tried and failed over the last month. If anything, this latest gambit should be a reminder to the gullible, which includes most of official D.C., that those constant claims that this was actually all going great for the White House maybe weren't true after all. The key point remains the same. Trump will likely have a much harder time getting Senate Republicans to abolish the filibuster than most imagine. But if he does, it's a good thing. No good fortune for the American Republic is possible with the filibuster in place, and the short-term politics are pretty good too. So go ahead, clown. Make every thinking Democrat's day.
You have been listening to Kagro in the morning with Waldman.
I guess I'll take it. Anyway, like I said, I'm serious. Everybody has to send me $1,000 if this happens. I mean, look, I taught people, including the journalistic establishment, that this was a thing that was real. They mostly believed that it was not. And now they believe it. And now they want it. You should want it too. We'll see you tomorrow.